Now it's time for Culture Talk, where we talk about culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined today with philosopher and theologian Ken Samples. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken.
Hi, Sandra.
We're going to be talking about whether the Bible contradicts itself. So that's kind of a common question or concern that skeptics will have.
Sure.
Even something that they'll challenge Christians with, like, hey, I can't believe in the Bible and Christianity itself because the Bible contradicts itself. So I'm wondering, as a philosopher and theologian, you've likely encountered plenty of questions about that.
Yeah.
What are some of the common contradictions that you hear, or alleged contradictions that you hear from skeptics?
I think one that's very big, and it relates to RTB, it relates to the book of Genesis. It's day 4 when the sun and the moon are created. That seems so counter. I mean, you've got plant life before that. That's obviously, it's contrary to science, and it may be contradictory in terms of the creation days itself. So that would be one. Another one would be some of the details relating to the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, were there 2 angels at the tomb? One count says 2, another seems to say 1. So there seems to be these kind of conflicting ideas. One more, now this is a tension less for non-Christians and more for different varieties of Christian. Paul seems to indicate that we're justified by faith, but you read the book of James, and James says we're justified by works. That creates tension within Christianity.
Well, let's kind of unpack some of these. So the first one, it especially pertains to our organization that we work for, Reasons to Believe, because we're looking at the creation days and the order in which things were created. So with regard to day 4, how would someone who holds an old earth creation perspective respond to that concern that there's a contradiction there?
So the old earth folks are going to say, rather than 6 successive 24-hour periods that, Hugh Ross would say these are epochs or these are long eras of time. So the standard interpretation from Hugh would be everything was created in verse 1 of Genesis. Creation is created all at once. And what we find in the successive chapters is kind of an unfolding. It's not that the sun and the moon weren't there, but then they appear. And so there is an unfolding of that kind of thing, rather than there was, plants and things. And of course, plants can't live without the sun. So that would be a way of addressing that would be more consistent in our mind with science.
And I've heard it explained that the creation account is told from the perspective of someone on the surface of Earth. And so from the surface of Earth, the atmosphere was thick. So the sun and the moon did exist, but the atmosphere was such that it couldn't be seen from that perspective. And on day 4, the atmosphere becomes such that you can see.
And that fits the context pretty well. Now, with another contradiction with regard to the angels, well, remember what a contradiction is. That's when 2 statements they clash, they negate or deny one another. They can't both be true. So if one report mentions 2 angels and one report mentions 1 angel, if you've got 2, you've got 1. So it may be they were just reporting a different point of view, not necessarily a clash of ideas. And similarly with Paul and James, I think Paul is saying we are saved by grace, and it is through faith, and it is in Christ. James is simply coming along and saying, but it's not a dead faith. It's always a faith that Luther used to say was pregnant with good works.
Yeah, I was going to say that, pregnant with good works. I know that quote. It makes me think of a relationship. If you're in a relationship and you love that person and you state that you love that person and you've vowed to love that person, you still, because of your love, are doing works.
Exactly.
So I kind of envision it that way to maybe kind of help with that perception that there's a contradiction. It's really this is motivated by
Yeah.
faith. So works are motivated by faith.
A lot of the differences are in emphasis rather than, genuine contradictions. And of course, I think that leads us then maybe to offer the advice that you want to make sure it really is a contradiction. You want to make sure you've understood the passage. What kind of genre of literature are we addressing? Psalms is different than, let's say, the book of Genesis or the book of Romans. We also want to look at the words and what do they mean. So coming to have a clearer interpretation can help resolve some of these issues.
Yeah. Well, for Christians who are trying to engage in conversations with other Christians even, but also with skeptics, what would you say? Like maybe are there some resources or some tips on how they can receive a criticism and receive a challenge to their faith and then press into that with exploring deeper? Where would you point them to?
Well, I think understanding the Bible, more about the Bible is good. RTB, our colleague Krista Bontrager has done a number of resources where she talks about interpreting the Bible, looking at the book of Genesis. RTB has a lot of good sources in that regard. I think, again, don't presume that there's going to be a contradiction. Accept the idea that there are tensions and there are challenges, but if you're responsibly interpreting the Bible, I think you're going to be able to work through these things. Ask your pastor, consult good commentaries, talk to people who can help you think through these ideas.
And do you have a particular resource or books? Because I know you love books and
absolutely.
you have a massive library. Do you have any books that you would recommend?
Well, there is a book by Jack Davis. His name is John Jefferson Davis, a handbook of Bible texts. And he arranges key biblical passages in systematic theological order. That's always the first book that I look to when I'm writing or when I'm going to give a talk. It's very handy, very inexpensive.
Yeah. And let's do a little self-plug because I know you've got plenty of books. Which one would you recommend for readers?
I think on an issue like this, I would recommend Christianity Cross-Examined because I look at biblical challenges and biblical tensions, particularly in part 2 of the book.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that, Ken. If you'd like to hear more on this topic, you can go to reasons.org and search for Ken's blog, Reflections. You can also go to support.reasons.org and look for Ken's fine book called Christianity Cross-Examined.